Hello reader. Oh, sorry, I was just playing a game and I didn't realize that you guys were also interested, but come join me. Hey everybody, and welcome to the announcement video for Gamenightathon 4.0, the July edition of my readathon. So I do Gamenightathon twice a year. I do the July edition and the December edition. They are separate from one another, and actually every year we kind of start fresh in any case. So if you haven't played Gamenightathon before, then feel free to hop on, because there's no prior requirements to being able to join this readathon. Gamenightathon is a board game inspired readathon in which typically at this point in time, 2 years in a row, we play a version of the same game and we use that game basically to define our reading choices for the month. I will also be talking about Read It Short within this video. Now, do know that Read It Short and Gamenightathon do not have to both be enjoyed by you. You can absolutely join Read It Short if you're joining Gamenightathon and vice versa, but you don't have to. I am going to incorporate Read It Short into Gamenightathon, but if you don't want to, then you don't have to. So I'll talk about that in the second half of the video, so jump to this timestamp in case you're only interested in Read It Short, which is a weekend-long readathon in which we basically just focus on reading short books. So let's go back to Gamenightathon. So Gamenightathon will run for the entirety of the month of July, and we are basing ourselves off of the game of Labyrinth. So this is the second year in which we'll be tackling Labyrinth. However, I have made a few tweaks when it comes to the way in which we were playing it last year. Now, to start off with, I want to talk about prompts, because I left that to the second half of the video last year, and I actually feel like it works better if we just start off with the prompt mechanisms. Basically, for Gamenightathon, your choices of prompts are going to be super open. I basically want you to have such a wide variety of options for the prompts that you don't feel restricted by these prompts in any way, and I actually hope that you'll love figuring out how to tie a book to a particular prompt. So on the board you will see a lot of squares, and some of these squares have an icon on them, and that icon is basically going to be your prompt. Now, if you want a fixed list of prompts, I am going to provide one that will be available on my Google Drive. However, the mechanism for choosing a book based on the icon is very wide. Basically, I want you to look at this icon and choose a book that you can associate to the icon. It does not have to figure on the cover. It does not have to be part of the content of the book. There can be a much wider way in which you can see the association of that icon with your book. Let's take an example. For example, let's take the example of the chicken icon. Okay, so the most obvious interpretation for a prompt featuring this icon would be that you're reading a book that has a chicken on the cover or a chicken in the content of the book. However, you can go way wider. A chicken can refer to, like people calling somebody a chicken for being afraid, and that means that you could read a horror book, for example, as that is going to try to get you to be afraid. But you could also read a book that you are scared of picking up for some reason or another. Maybe you're afraid it won't live up to the hype. Maybe you're just scared by the thickness of the book. But there are many other ways to interpret a prompt. For example, like instead of just focusing on chicken, we can look at a rooster. A rooster is crowing at the beginning of the day, and so he's the first one to talk about the beautiful day that we have ahead of ourselves. So maybe you could read an ARC copy, because then you will be the first one to be able to spread the news of your experience with that book. So there are many options. The associations will be totally down to you. They can be very personal. Maybe you had a chicken that was called Rebecca, and so you want to read the book Rebecca, or a book by an author called Rebecca. It doesn't have to make sense to anybody else. It has to make sense to you. And I would love to hear about your associations, but you don't have to explain the associations neither. And that is what I mean when I say that the prompts are super wide, because basically there are many ways in which you can tie certain books to a prompt. And so hopefully you will not feel restricted when it comes to your choices based on these particular icons. So now that we've talked about the prompt selection, let's talk about Labyrinth as a whole. So the overall goal of Labyrinth is going to be that you're going to try and collect as many icons as possible by navigating the maze. The maze, however, is not a stationary thing, it will be shifting along the way. So there's a little bit of a setup to this particular game, and that also depends on your choices in terms of setup. First thing to choose is the team that you want to belong to. The 4 corner pieces on the board represent the 4 teams. So we've got Team Diamond, Team Heart, Team Circle and Team Triangle. And so you will choose a theme. You can choose that by rolling a dice, by doing a wheel spin, by just choosing the one that you are more drawn to. I mean, they're just geometrical shapes, so maybe you don't have a preference, but you will choose a team and you will choose a token that you will use to navigate the board, and that token you can then place in the space that belongs to your team. So if you're Team Diamond, you place yourself in the upper left corner of the board because that is the space where Team Diamond will start from. Next up, if you're choosing to physically print a board, there is a physical version of the blank board in which you will see that there are some gray spaces that are already pre-filled. So these are the spaces that you will not be able to move as the game proceeds. And then there are blank spaces with nothing in them in the middle, and you will be filling out those blank spaces with the extra tiles from visual number 2. If you want to, you can also print visual number 3, which is basically the selection of all of the icons. This you can then print and cut out, and you will be using those cards to draw a new icon whenever you're ready for a new book. Now, the extra tiles that I have provided and that you have potentially printed out and cut out, they have to be placed in a certain order, and this is the difference from last year's version of Gamenightathon. Last year I allowed all of you to randomly start out with your board in a certain way. This year we are all gonna start it the same way. So I'm providing you with this starting board. This is how you need to place all of your tiles onto the board at the start of the game. Everybody's starting with the same setup. This board will also be available over as a Canva template, and then you can actually use the Canva template to play with throughout the month if you prefer to just like digitally shift your board around. You can use the Canva template throughout the month in order to shift your board based on the reality of the choices you make throughout the readathon. When it comes to the printing of the cards, this is also up to personal preference. Either you print out the cards and you draw from the cards, or you use the spinner wheel that I will also have provided for you to randomly decide upon the next icon that you're going to be working towards. And then finally, for those of you who will be playing with the original board game, I will make a list that will link each one of the original icons on the board to the icons that I have made for Gamenightathon, so that everybody who lands on, let's say, the chest will end up going for the same icon. Rather, what I think we were doing last year was basically everybody was making a list for themselves of like which icon would correspond to which one on the Gamenightathon board. So I've made a fixed list of that for this year's edition. So if you want to use the original board because it's just easier for moving the tiles along, then you can use this translation guide basically in order to play the same way that everybody else is playing. We've got the board set up now, so it is time to go into gameplay. So at the start of the game you have what I've just described to you. This is the board that you are playing with. This is the setup that you're playing with. The only difference is where you place your token, as that depends upon the team that you've decided to go for. Now, the first thing that you will do is draw an icon, or you're going to spin a wheel in order to get an icon. And then let's say you get that chicken icon that we used as an example before. If you're Team Diamond and you have to get to the chicken, you have to figure out how to get there as quickly as possible with as quickly as possible I mainly mean with as few slides of the labyrinth as possible. You will see from this visual there is no way for you to directly go from the diamond space to the chicken space at this point in time. There is just too many blockades. There is no way to directly go, so we will have to shift the maze in order to be able to get to the chicken. So what I propose in this case is we are going to be moving to this spot, the spot where I've placed the blue dots, and then we can shift the maze by adding the extra tile that we've got left over in sliding that into the second row starting from the left. That makes us slide over because we will stay on the square that we landed on, but we will just move along with it as the row is shifted. This means that the mermaid's space at the end of that row now falls off of the board. This becomes the extra tile that we can use in the next turn, and we now have a clear shot at reaching the chicken, and that is one turn. So each turn will comprise of reading a book that fits the prompt in whichever way that you see fit, and moving your token to that icon, trying to use as few slides as possible, because every time that you slide the board you lose 50 points. So for this particular example, we only needed to slide the board once, so we got a 50-point penalty, and our positive points will be the amount of pages that the book that we've read contained. So let's say we read a 666-page book, then we will have earned 616 points at this point in time because we slid the board once. You will always have to slide once at the very least, so even if you are able to immediately reach the other icon that you have to get to, you still have to slide. You can just choose when you're sliding. That goes in general. You can always choose when you're sliding. Either it's the first thing you do in a turn, either it's at the end of the turn. For example, when you don't need any slides in order to get to your icon, you can move to the icon and then do the slide. But as I've just shown in my example, you can also move the icon, slide, and then move further after you've slid the maze around. So basically that is going to be the mechanism. You will always be reading a book, sliding the maze, and then you will log that book, you will draw a new icon or spin the wheel again, and then everything repeats itself. I do not encourage the reading of multiple books at the same time. If you are doing so, sure, go ahead, but you should not know your next icon before you have finished this icon. So you can definitely read multiple books at the same time, however, that is a little bit of a gamble. You can read another book that you know would fit multiple prompts that are part of the range of icons that we have at our disposal, in the hopes of being able to count that book later within the readathon. But you should not draw like two icons and know like, okay, I'm gonna first go for this one that I drew first and then go to the other one, because subconsciously that will impact the way that you slide the maze if you know where you have to go to next. However, this year I'm also introducing some sabotage. So on every Tuesday of the month, I am going to be sharing with you a post in which I give you guys instructions for how to manipulate the board. This extra manipulation is basically an extra slide, a slide that you don't have to count. This is not negative points that you are accumulating, but it might negatively impact your board, or it could of course be a blessing in disguise and it might actually help you out. At those times I will let you know the orientation of the tile. So there are 3 possible tile layouts, and so for each one of them I'll give you a possible orientation, so which way to turn the tile, and then I'll also let you know in which row or column to add the tile and whether you're going to slide it in starting from the left, starting from the right, starting from the top, or starting from the bottom. This maneuver needs to be carried out after you finish your current prompt. So when I announce the next maneuver, if you are at that point working towards an icon, then the moment that you finish that book and you log that book, that is when you will carry out the maneuver before drawing the next icon card and before starting the next turn. I of course have no way of knowing whether you guys are actually doing so, and so if this is a mechanism that you absolutely despise and that would keep you away from this readathon otherwise, then just forget about it. But I think it might be a really fun thing to kind of keep things interesting and to see if, you know, fate is on your side or not. Now, I'm going to be sharing that over on the community tab, over here on YouTube, over on my Discord in the Gamenightathon server, and I'm also going to be sharing it over on my Instagram account. So there are 3 ways for you to find out about this. If you're not following me on Instagram, if you're not on my Discord, you should still see it pop up here over on YouTube. So with that, we've explained the entire mechanism of the game. I've also already alluded to the point system. So your point system will basically be the page count of the book that you've read minus the amount of of slides that you needed multiplied by 50, and the overall team score will basically be an addition of all of those scores divided by the amount of players within your team. The winning team of Gamenightathon, the July edition, will win a bonus slot for the December lottery edition of Gamenightathon, as has been the case in all previous years. So good luck to you guys. I'm very much looking forward to seeing what you guys do with the prompts this year. Hopefully you'll enjoy a return to this prompt selection mechanism. However, we aren't done yet, because I'm also introducing another element to this readathon by combining it with Read It Short. So Read It Short is a reading weekend that I host every quarter, and July is the appointment for the next edition of Read It Short. The idea is that a weekend long we will focus on reading short books. Short books are what you make it out to be, and most months I have a theme that I kind of propose but you don't have to follow, and the same is true here. We will have a lot of reading sprints going on at that particular time, and so it is a perfect time to kind of catch up together to try and focus on the shorter reads and get through more pages that way. Now, you are more than welcome, even if you're not reading short books, if you're not part of Gamenightathon, if you're part of Gamenightathon but you don't want to be part of Read It Short, all of you are welcome, the more the merrier, but I'm gonna incorporate Read It Short as an additional mechanism to Gamenightathon. You don't have to do this, you can do Gamenightathon without adding this element to it, but during the weekend of Read It Short, which will be the final weekend of the month of July, during that weekend there will be 3 additional prompts. 3 prompts that are not on the board, 3 prompts for which you don't have to slide the maze in order to get to them. During that weekend you can read as much as you want, as long as it can be linked to those 3 icons, and you do have to start and finish these books within that weekend. If you choose to read 5 books in that weekend for this one prompt, then that is acceptable, but only during Read It Short, not for the rest of Gamenightathon. And yeah, these prompts are going to have the same mechanism. It's gonna be an icon that I share with you guys, and you're gonna choose a book that you would like to read that you can somehow associate to this icon. I'm going to share the first icon with you guys over here in the announcement video. The second icon I will introduce early within July, and the third icon I will only introduce within the weekend itself. So all 3 of those icons can be used for a selection of Read It Short books. Throughout that weekend is the only time in which you're allowed to read for those 3 icons. And the good thing about it is that during that weekend you don't need to slide a maze, which means that these books are going to count only as positive points. So the page count you read during Read It Short for books that fit in with these particular icons, those are only going to be positive points. There is no subtraction when it comes to the manipulation of the maze, as you're not manipulating the maze. So that's why I wanted to place it there at the end of July as a sort of like last push. Let's all try and push as many pages into our team as possible. I, as the host, am not competitively participating in Gamenightathon, but I will be reading for every single theme throughout the month, but I will not be reading for a team during the Read It Short weekend, because that would be quite unfair to the other teams that I'm not reading for that weekend. So I don't know yet what I'll do with that weekend with those scores, but in any case, for the rest of the month I will be contributing my efforts to one team at a time each week. And yeah, I think that is going to be it in terms of what I need to explain throughout this video. Hopefully that has been clear to you. Definitely feel free to ask me questions. I do have a guide that I prepared for this readathon, so you can download that guide in the Google Drive that will be linked in the description of this video. There you will find all of the visuals for this readathon, as well as the Canva template where you can use the board there in order to digitally play this readathon without having to physically print out all the visuals. And so yeah, if you have any questions, feel free to ask them here within the video, or you can ask them over on Discord, as was the case last year. When you have made your choice for which team you're going to be a part of, you will have to assign that team to yourself in the Discord by selecting a certain role within the roles channel of my Discord. There are a few messages in the roles channel for different types of roles, so if you are not a part of the Gamenightathon server yet, then you will have to assign that one to yourself, but you'll also have to assign that team to yourself. So this will be a message that is 1 year old because it is from last year. And if you were part of, let's say, Team Heart last year and you want to be part of Team Circle this year, then just unclick the emoticon for heart and click the one for circle now. It doesn't really matter if you were to have access to multiple team chats, it's just a place for you to be able to chat specifically with the people who are forming a part of your team, to kind of try and bolster each other up and make each other excited for the readathon and like positively encourage one another. Maybe smack talk some of the other teams if you really want to. But so yeah, with that I think I'm rounding off this video, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and let me know if you are taking part in Gamenightathon this year. Bye!